Hi, I'm Sharon, and I have been a member of the Also Common Nursery team since 2013. Today we're going to talk about pruning, and the first thing we're going to talk about is tools. First thing I like to have is a good pair of gloves. These are breathable, they have great grip, and they're very comfy on your hands. That's what I like to see. If you're pruning roses, you might want to have a pair of rose gloves. They come all the way up to your elbow, protect your arms from the thorns. The next thing I can't live without is a pair of hand pruners. I prefer to have a bypass pruner. Mine have been in use for probably almost 20 years now. They don't crush the stems of the plants as much as an anvil pruner would. Always buy the most expensive type of pruner that you can. They'll last longer, and over the course of a lifetime, you really will pay for quality. Next thing that I have here is a bow saw. Bow saws are great for pruning trees, which we're not really going to talk about today, but we will link some information about that if you want some additional information. Invaluable tool for those of us who don't necessarily have the hand strength to get really large branches cut. In this particular set, there is also a pruning saw that comes with it. I love these little pruning saws. They fit nicely in your pocket. They pop open and they close. Also great for a little bit larger branches. Next thing we're going to talk about, or the next thing that I think that everybody should have, is a pair of loppers. They're great for branches over an inch in caliper. Sometimes I use them a lot on roses. It helps me get in there and not get my arms and my hands torn up. These are also bypass rather than anvil, which does not crush the stems as we discussed previously. There actually is on the back of this a little diagram of proper pruning cuts, so that's always helpful. The last tool that I'm going to show in my pruning arsenal is a pair of hedge shears. I personally don't use them a whole lot. I use them on boxwoods, I use them on taxus. Primarily something that we use for hedges. When I'm doing individual pruning on most shrubs, I use my bypass pruners, and I don't just do shearing, I do individual cuts. But this is great on a hedge when you're actually trying to shear something. Boxwoods, as I said, taxus, any of those kinds of shrub like evergreens. This particular variety has a 10-year warranty. All these pruning tools are available here at Also Common Nursery year-round. Come on in and take a look. So the first thing we need to talk about with pruning is why we prune. I'm not a big advocate of pruning every shrub all the time, every single year. I typically want to have a reason for why I'm pruning. And the first reason that I have for pruning is to clean the plant. And by cleaning, I mean we take out the dead branches or broken branches. And on this one, you can see that these branches are dead. And the way you can tell that is that you can see viable buds coming out of these branches. But this branch specifically has no viable buds. So this is the branch that we would cut out. I see a couple of others, and we'll get into that a little bit later. We'll do the demo on it. The next thing that I always look for when I'm pruning plants is crossing branches. So when the branches are crossing, they rub together and they start to cause injury on the plant, which then can cause death in those branches. It can also be a vector for disease, so that diseases, fungal diseases, various diseases can get into those wounded tissues of the plant. The next, one of the other reasons that we prune is for thinning. This is pretty dense. A lot of the branches are growing into the interior, and we typically try to thin some of those branches out so that you get more sunlight penetration and you get more air circulation. So now we're going to get into how we take these dead branches out. As we talked about earlier, this branch is dead. So I get my pruners right in there. I try not to cut the branch collar. And you'll see that there's no green inside there. So we've obviously made the correct decision that this branch is dead. There's another dead branch here. There's a viable bud right here that we don't want to cut. So we're going to go just above that viable bud and we're going to cut that dead one out. This is a Macrophylla Hydrangea. Most years we find that we have to cut our Macrophylla hydrangeas down to the ground here in Northwest Indiana. It often sacrifices some bloom because they bloom on old and new wood, and it takes them a while to form new buds on the new wood to bloom. I think this year we might have a winner because I was out checking my Macrophyllas today, and I have viable buds like this all the way to the tips, which is rare. But most years you're cutting out a lot more than we're cutting out this time. I'm just going to go quickly and cut out the dead wood. And as you can see, it's starting to open up the plant a little bit. And allowing for more growth long term. You don't want those ugly stubs sticking up all over the place. All right. So now we've got it pruned down to, for the most part, good, healthy buds. And we're ready to go into spring with this plant. Okay, so this is an Arborescence Hydrangea. I pulled this one so that I could talk about cutting off the crossing branches. And it's really a judgment call a lot of the times on a crossing branch. While this particular branch is stronger and healthier, it's going in a direction that we really don't want the branch to go. You want the branches to grow towards the outside of the plant, not grow into the interior. So with this particular branch, I'm going to cut it right down to here. You can see that the buds are opposite buds on this plant, and so we make a flat cut about a 1/4 inch above those plants. You'll see that's live tissue there. And that will push the new buds, it will cause the new buds to push new branches there. There's another crossing branch here. It's not it actually doesn't even look like it's alive. I typically locate the branch collar, which is right here. We don't want to cut into the branch collar, and I take that one out. It's going to cause all kinds of problems if it's alive, as will this one right here. As you can see, this is rubbing on a whole bunch of different stuff. We're going to take that one out. Some of these are not alive, they're just breaking off in my hands. Sometimes it's kind of hard to get your pruners down in there, but getting these interior branches out is always a good idea. There we go. Yeah, we've got two here. And you can really see how they start to rub on each other over time, and they start to cause damage to one another. Now the question is, which one are we going to take? So I'm going to check for life. If you nick the bark gently, you can tell that that one is still alive. And so is this one. So we're going to take this one out. This is a judgment call. But I think that one's going to cause more problems long term. I don't like the looks of this guy. This guy's dead. And you see how taking that one branch opened up the interior? I'm also going to take this one out for the same reason. We do a lot of this kind of pruning on young shrubs, more so on young shrubs than I do on older shrubs. Because with young shrubs, the structure is much more important. Okay, that's still alive. I'm going to cut this little dead part off here. This is a really long stub here. I hate stubs on my shrubs. They're not good for the shrubs, so we're going to cut that off. There were no viable buds at the tip of that. These are some examples of bad cuts. We did these in the fall. Not everybody really understands the pruning techniques that we should follow. So this is a much longer stub than we want to see. Here again, about 1/4 inch. And you can see how this one's opening up and it's ready to go into spring. One more example of pruning for structure. This time we're thinking more of thinning the plant out. We got some problems here again with crossing branches, and you can see how dense this is in the center. We want good air circulation. We want good structure in the plant long term. This is always a scary cut to make, but we're going to take this big one out. A really big branch to cut, and as I said, it's a scary cut to make when you haven't done this a lot, but you can see how much it opened up. It's allowing for a lot of additional growth to come in. If this were in the ground, I would have a little easier time getting this nice and flat. It's kind of hard with the pot. We're going to trim out the other branches that are going to cause some problems down the road. We're going to take this guy. And as you can see, we're starting to open up quite a bit. We're trying to get rid of all those branches that are going to cause problems down the line. There you go. One's thinned out. There's a few adjustments that I would make here and there, but for the most part, we are in good shape for this year on this plant. So the next thing we wanted to talk about was when you prune. The three that we just talked about, that we just showed as examples, are all summer bloomers. Summer bloomers, those shrubs that bloom after June or from June on, we consider to be summer bloomers, and they should be typically pruned at this time of year. Things that bloom this time of the year, lilacs, azaleas, rhododendrons, those should be pruned immediately after they bloom. You don't prune them now or you will sacrifice bloom. So I have a couple examples here of cutback shrubs. This is something that you may prune back in the spring. You may prune it back in the fall. I typically wait until spring to see how much has actually died back. When I talk about a cutback shrub, I'm talking about something that typically dies to the ground over winter, but really isn't dead. It's just the upper growth. If you take a look at this bush clover, it's a great shrub, typically underused. You don't see a lot of it in the landscapes. It's stunning when it does bloom, but you can see that this branch is dead, and all of these branches are dead. That doesn't mean that the bush clover is completely dead. It just means that the whole top part of the plant has died. You can cut this back to just a few inches, and it will be ready for spring. You'll see it emerge. Oftentimes it's kind of late to emerge, but give it a chance. Don't consider it dead. Other shrubs, look at that. We can see a little bit of green. We'll get new buds off of that, and this plant will be just fine. Some other popular cutback shrubs are Caryopteris, also known as blue mist, and butterfly bush. 9 times out of 10, our butterfly bush die back to the ground over winter. This particular one is leafing out already. We only have the very tips that died back this year because it was wintered over in the greenhouse, but in our landscapes, we're probably not going to see this much growth on the butterfly bush yet. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is specifically dogwoods. This is one of those plants that it doesn't really matter whether you prune them now or you prune them later, but one of the things we probably should talk about is the fact that as dogwoods age, they lose this pretty red branch color, which is why we love them. So one of the things you can do to mitigate that is to prune out some of the old branches. And I don't know that my hand is going to be strong enough to do this. That's the first cut. You can see how this branch actually isn't even green anymore. So this branch is dead. If I had a pair of loppers, I would get in there a little bit closer than this. Kind of struggling with getting in here. But we want to cut out these darkened branches, and that will promote newer, brighter colored, prettier branches later on. So you can already see a huge difference in this plant. We've opened up the center so that there's more room for growth, there's more room for air circulation, there's more sunlight penetration, and we've pruned out most of the really ugly, older, for the most part, dead branches. And next winter, we will be seeing a lot more beautiful red branches. Okay, when we're talking spring planting, we've got to talk about roses a little bit. The example that I have here has been wintered over in the greenhouse, so it's not necessarily the best example for roses coming out of winter here in Northwest Indiana. This guy is way ahead of everybody else that's out in our landscapes right now. But we can still talk a little bit about the basics of pruning at this time of year. Typically, we cut out all of the dead branches, and you can tell that this one's dead because it's very brown, and these are very green. So this one's going to come out. And then the premise with roses is very similar to all the other shrubs. The rules are very much the same. This guy is growing towards the inside of the plant, so you're going to want to take him out simply because he's going to cause problems. Roses tend to be susceptible to powdery mildew, so with roses it's even more important to make sure that there's good air circulation within the interior of the plant. So I typically cut out things that are growing towards the inside of the plant. You're trying to make this more vase shaped basically, so that the growth is going towards the outside of the plant. I don't have my rose gloves on, and we can tell, can't we? Okay, you can see that this one may have some viable buds on it, but for the most part, this branch is not in good shape. So I'm going to take this all the way down to here. Same with this, there's no viable buds on this little stub here. So you can see what's called a branch collar here. You always try not to cut into the branch collar. 1/4 inch above the branch. And this is an angle cut because these buds are alternate buds. When we talked about the hydrangeas, they were opposite buds. And when you have opposite buds that come out directly opposite of each other, you're going to make a flat cut. But when you have alternate buds, which means they're actually alternating, you're going to make angled cuts. This particular branch I'm going to cut because this bud is angling out towards the outside of the plant, and I'm going to make an angled cut right there, just a little bit above the bud, and that encourages the growth to go out to the outside of the plant. Going to make a few more cuts here, and we'll be all ready for spring. So I brought everybody out here today to talk about one of the scariest things to prune, and that's treeform hydrangeas. I get questions over and over and over again every year about how to prune treeform hydrangeas, and the basics are the same. It's just a little bit scarier. So the principles are the same for pruning treeform hydrangeas. The first thing we look for is crossing branches, and I've got a prime example right here. You can see where these two have been rubbing, and you can see all the damage that has occurred because of it. So we're gonna take that one out right there, cut right above the branch collar, and take that guy out. You can already see a little bit of an opening in the head. We have the same problem going on here. You've got crossing branches here, so we're going to take this guy out right here. Look at how this one has just wrapped himself around this other branch. We're going to take this whole branch out here. Oh, that's pretty scary. I think we're going to take it out right here instead. It's okay to change your mind. And one more problem branch here. It's growing right towards the interior, so we're going to take that out. And I think we have just about taken care of the crossing branches. One of the other things that you have to be concerned about with treeform hydrangeas is to keep the size of the head in line with the size caliper it is. If the head gets too big, you're going to have the tree start leaning over. So at this point, we typically start heading them back. There's a couple rules of thought here. You can, every few years, you can really take them back hard. We're not going to do that this year. I'm not unhappy with the size that this tree is at the moment. So I'm just going to go up. You can see where we cut last year, where we pruned last year, and I'm just going to go up a couple leaf nodes above that. You can see these buds haven't really started to swell yet, but you can see them, and you're going to cut just above them. They're opposite buds, so it's a flat cut, and we're going to just kind of go at this kind of quickly here. A tip for pruning, if you're going to do a lot of it, it's always nice to have a tarp underneath you so that you can just drop your things right onto the tarp and have easy cleanup. I didn't bring one today, but I'm going to drop them anyway. We'll rake this out later. Okay, as you can see, we've pretty much completed our pruning of this Treeform Hydrangea. I did take off all the dead blooms. That's one of the things that sets hydrangeas apart from other shrubs. They hold on to their blooms over winter. I personally love to keep those blooms on for winter interest and cut them off in the spring. Some people do prune these in the fall, and that's acceptable, but I personally love those old spent blooms for winter interest. He looks a little scary right now, but he's actually in really good shape and ready for spring. We've gotten rid of all the crossing branches. We've gotten rid of the dead branches. We've headed it back with hydrangeas and with some other shrubs. Cutting them back actually makes stronger branches and bigger blooms. So that's what we're going for with this plant. And I think he's all ready for summer. We'll see some buds starting within the next month or so, and we'll be seeing this guy bloom in July. So that wraps up some of the basics for pruning, for spring pruning, early spring pruning. There's obviously a lot of things that we didn't touch upon. We're gonna give you guys a link for some additional information out of the Purdue Extension, which is really great information if you need to know anything additionally. Feel free to come in and ask one of our green team members. Thanks for watching, everybody. The first question that came in was about burning bush. Somebody wanted to know about pruning their burning bush. Burning bush do have a tendency to really grow big, and we often don't plan for the size that they want to be when we plant them. When I prune burning bush, they have alternate buds. I usually pop down to a joint and just cut them off. They tolerate some pretty extreme pruning. I'm not sure how far down you really need to go, but they will tolerate pretty extreme pruning, and the principle is the same. You're going to cut it off just above another shoot that will then take over for that branch. We had a question about roses. Different roses are pruned differently. We pretty much touched on shrub roses. We gave you the link for the Purdue Extension publications. There is an excellent publication on roses that talks about all the different kinds of roses. As for shrub roses, I pretty much just prune them down as far as I need to prune them down. I typically only cut out dead wood. I don't go down too much further than that. So I hope that answers that question. Somebody asked about holly, when to prune holly. Most evergreens are best pruned right after their spring flush, which means right after the new branches emerge. Hollies are pretty much no different. You can prune them back individually or you can shear them, either one. I personally like it better when you prune the branches back individually. It doesn't give that sheared look. It opens up some space and it opens up some sunlight penetration, which is always helpful. Let's see, how do you tell old wood from new wood? Primarily, we see this on hydrangeas. The new wood is typically not as thick and woody. With Macrophylla hydrangeas, the new wood is actually very supple and green, and the old wood looks more like what you think of as stems on a shrub. Best way to prune an Arborvitae, honestly, I typically don't. If you do have to prune it, I think that it's probably far more attractive if you prune it back individually rather than shear it. We had a question on Clematis. There are several different, there's 3 different types of Clematis. You prune each differently. It is extremely helpful to know what kind of Clematis you have. If you don't, you would just, sorry, the phone's ringing. I would just look for buds that are swelling and cut anything that is dead above that point. If you really want to cut it down a little bit further, you can. Some you prune all the way down to the ground, some you are only supposed to prune about halfway back, and some you're supposed to not prune at all. So it will be a little bit of a trial and error until you figure out what works best for your Clematis. Any other questions that I haven't? Oh, pruning Japanese maples. Should you thin them out? Japanese maples have a tendency to thin themselves out. You typically have a little bit of dieback every winter on Japanese maples, and that in and of itself tends to thin the tree out a little bit. I typically don't prune them too much for size, although you can, but the principles are the same. You look for a bud that is arching outward and is not going to grow towards the tree, and do it the same way that you would any other pruning. If there are any questions that we haven't answered, please check out the link that we provided for the Purdue publications. They have excellent information, and you can probably find something in their list of publications on just about any gardening question you have. But certainly feel free to come in and talk to our green team specialists here at Alsipoma Nursery. Thanks and have a great day, guys.